Okay. Yeah, so hello, everybody. Welcome to the discussion of the Heaven and Earth grocery store. So I just wanted to start out by saying that I think Jerry asked me to lead a book discussion because she knows that I'm an avid reader. And I wanted to find a book, that had a Jewish theme, but that was contemporary, at least written contemporarily. And I thought of this immediately because, as you know, this book had won the National Book Award and had great acclaim. I think it won lots of other awards, and McBride was interviewed extensively. And, also it's very cool that he lives here in Lambertville. So I just thought it was like a perfect book for us to discuss. And so those of you who know a little bit more about James McBride, and you may have known that one of his first books was called The Color of Water, and I just want to put a big plug out for it if you haven't read it. It's actually my favorite book that he wrote and one of my favorite books of all time. And it's a memoir that he writes about his upbringing, but it's really like an ode to his mother, who was a Jewish woman who married a Black man and raised 12 children. And I think if you haven't read it, really, really suggest it. So to start off our conversation, I found a clip from the PBS NewsHour where James McBride was interviewed and he discussed the theme of this book. So I thought it would be good for us to just watch that first together. And I asked Jerry to play it for us. So I'll let Jerry show it.
Author James McBride has a new novel out today, The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. Like much of McBride's work, it's rooted in race, religion, and personal history. Jeffrey Brown turns the page for our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
A rehearsal for a musical called Bobos. Make that a would-be musical. Novelist and musician James McBride actually wrote it 35 years ago, and it's since done nothing. No productions, zero success. But McBride is unfazed.
I just can't let it go, in part because I think it's good. And also, I don't mind failing. Writers, most of what we do fails. And that's the lesson that writing teaches you. I tell young writing students all the time, fail and fail better.
By that and pretty much any standard, the 65-year-old McBride, who lives in Lambertville, New Jersey, has been failing quite well. He's author of 5 novels, including Miracle at St. Anna, made into a film by Spike Lee, and The Good Lord Bird. Captain John Brown, and I am here in the name of the great Redeemer! The irreverent take on the abolitionist John Brown that won the 2013 National Book Award and was later made into a Showtime series. He's also written a biography of singer James Brown and the best-selling 1996 memoir, The Color of Water, a Black man's tribute to his white mother. The story of his white Jewish mother, Ruth. Ostracized by her family for marrying a Black man, she converted to Christianity and raised her 12 Black children in New York, much of the time on her own. McBride's new novel, The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, began with the story of another family member, but one he never knew and only learned about later in life, his grandmother.
My grandmother was Jewish, and my mother was Jewish, of course, but my grandmother I never met. She died in 1942. But I wanted, and she died, and she was an immigrant from Poland, and she had a very unhappy marriage. And I wanted my grandmother to have a wonderful life. I wanted her to be loved. So I wrote a book in which she was loved, and I made her loved.
So this became a kind of alternate life of a grandmother who you didn't really know.
That I never knew, yeah.
Through fiction.
Through fiction, yeah. Yeah, fiction is magical that way. You know, fiction allows your dreams to come true.
Like his own grandmother, McBride's main character runs a grocery store in a predominantly Black neighborhood. He's grounded his fiction in a real place and time, Pottstown, Pennsylvania in the 1930s and 40s.
This is just a notebook that I keep notes in, that I have all kinds of, Jewish faith, Friday night, can't touch money.
Combing through archives and local histories, he took notes about the largely Black community of Chicken Hill, with a mix of Jews and other immigrant groups, all facing levels of discrimination and antipathy by the surrounding white majority.
Everyone was just kind of trying to stay in their own lane, but it was impossible because of outside influences. And so in that regard, Pottstown is it's my Mayberry. Mayberry was where Andy Griffith was, and everyone was happy and all the folks were white and everything was, good old America, which is just fiction. Pottstown, my Mayberry, which is Pottstown, is real. It's much more real. It's much more, in my opinion, accurate in terms of its depiction of American life.
McBride has always grounded his life in music, often tying it to his writing. As when he toured the country with his Good Lord Bird band, when that book came up.
I hear a song about freedom.
He also taught music to children at New Brown Memorial, the Brooklyn church his parents founded in 1954.
I hear that song.
His art, he says, explores big themes in American life, including race, but always through characters he creates who live and survive on the margins, like the people he's known and loved.
If you're a writer and you're writing about race, the best thing you can do is forget about it and deal with the humanity of characters. You know what the boundaries are. Now you have to see which characters can kick up against those boundaries or illuminate those boundaries so that to make your story go. So I look at it from sort of that point of view. And also from the point of view that, cynicism is like, cynicism in a story is toxic. You have to really have a desire to see the good in people, to see them push past their boundaries.
An openness to who they are.
And openness to who they are, because they will lead you into story that shows you good stuff. And so I'm trying to get these characters to move, to show readers in a way that's not boring, that this history is important. Someone came here before you, and believe me, it's going to be okay. Watch what he or she did.
That sense of hope amid adversity clearly comes from his mother, who died in 2010. And the story McBride told in his memoir has remained a touchstone for many, as mixed-race families have become more common.
When my mother was married my father and had us, and we'd go on the subway and so forth, people would call her names. Like, I remember one time in the subway and somebody went at her, calling her end lover and all this crap. And we got off the train, and later on, I said, Mom, why do you can't let people talk to you like that. She said, their names can't hurt me. I'm happy. What did you do your homework? What was your homework? She didn't care. She already, her world was good. Self-definition is the first step towards self-control and peace. Now that journey is difficult. I agree. And I've been through it. But ultimately, the best way to be happy in that regard is to just appreciate everyone for who they are.
Read in that light, the Heaven and Earth grocery store, weaving together characters from different backgrounds, is James McBride's latest appreciation of the lives lived just below the surface of American history. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown in Lambertville, New Jersey.
Okay. So to start off, I have some questions that I'm going to ask, and I just think it would be nice if we had a discussion. So my first question to you is, how do you think that the book portrayed the themes that he discussed in the interview you just saw?
Hi, Susan. Could you
Okay.
repeat the themes as you saw it for us?
Well, I mean, it was really based on, you know, what James McBride just said, but, you know, one of the things he wanted to do, I don't know if this is a theme, but he wanted, so the main character Shona was based on his mother, and he wanted to make her beloved. The themes were about people pulling together, self-acceptance, acceptance of others. And I think one of his themes was appreciating the people who came before you, and that things ultimately will be okay, even though we may feel that they won't be. I think it's about community. So, yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts about that.
Thank you.
I have a comment. What struck me was the sense of how it relates to religion. When he asked his mother, "What color is God?" Her answer, "The color of water."
So how do you think in this book, The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, how do you think he portrayed religion?
Can I make a comment?
Of course.
So I'm gonna veer off of that slightly to what how he carried out the themes. So certainly in Shona and her deep desire to continue to live where she was and not want to move to where everybody else, I mean, that was her home, and those were her people, and she was just very accepting of them. And yeah, a lot of the interactions of the characters, her husband Moshe and his best friend Nate, even though they recognized there were kind of differences in their class and where they were, but he thought of him, he considered him his best friend. And the Italian boy and the
I think it was Soap and Fatty.
Soap and Fatty, and even Soap's mother, that, you know, they all came from different places, and they recognized that they were different, but they made the decision to stay together, to be together, to support one another.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts about the theme?
I'm not. Hi, everybody. I'm Rose. I'm a new member of this community. I thought what I heard him say and what I love so much about this book was that at the same time, it gave us a great view of all of the stereotypes of the day. You know, this is how the Blacks are, this is how the Jews, this is how the Blacks and Jews get together, what they think of each other. We see the envelope. He always gives us the envelope, but then he brings us inside. He brings us inside to the individual stories, as he said in his little interview, pushing up against the boundaries of that. So there's so many places where, at the same time that he's so brilliantly letting us feel all the racial tensions and distrust and dislike, amidst all that, where we have these awesome relationships between actual people where the boundaries don't matter. For so many that Julia called out, and just all the people who loved Shona. And almost, there was one comment where one of them was like, I almost don't like this person because I can't hate all white people because I know her, right? I can't hate all Jewish people because of her, damn it. So I love that. I thought that was the key theme of the book to me, and one that McBride does really well.
Thank you. Andre, looks like you have something to say.
I have to give you a little background why I got into this book. I have a direct experience with the locale of the book. I went to the Hill School. I don't know if you know, it's in Pottstown, PA, and it's mentioned disparagingly in the beginning of this book. It's very short. And but I was among the few Jewish students at the Hill School and kind of led my class Jewish. I used to take them across the golf course to the synagogue, which this is Chicken Hill. This is this whole area was still there. The synagogue now, I noticed when I went back for some reunion, I don't think it is operational. It's not become a Baptist church, I think. But I wanted to say that it gave me a lot of background on what he did. I like the book a lot. I have some criticisms too. First of all, is when you realize it's a very composite book of area and events. He pushes a lot of things together. I wasn't in Pottstown in the 30s. I was in Pottstown in the late 60s, in Jewish Pottstown in the late 60s. And and it was a very kind of a marginalized community. You could tell that. And I don't know what it is now. I just visit some reunion things. But there were obviously the tensions were less. I was at the Hill School when Martin Luther King was killed. And, there was a lot of racism in that school. But there were also protests. The Jewish children in that school had to go to chapel every day when I was there. And there was a revolt of the student body that got us so that we didn't have to go to chapel every day. So there were changes and things like that. So I want to give that background about the place. He chose, it seems a bit arbitrary that he chose Pottstown. And then he looked up the history of the Jewish community there. And then he built this fiction, which is wonderful. But we have to be aware of that. I don't know if it necessarily was what happened. And that's what my point is. And that's his, novelists take liberties with places and they can create them into different situations. But I think we should be aware of that. The part I liked very much in this book is we get to see Jews who aren't book Jews. They aren't all intellectuals. They're people who work on railroads. They were doing the same jobs as African Americans were doing at that time, or if they could get those jobs. So that part I really liked about the book. And I liked, the themes are very beautiful. Sometimes a little bit too much, the characters want to be the theme. You know what I mean? They're not the way people are. That's the part, in reflection, I have a little problem with, but that's.
I have to jump back in, even though I don't like speaking twice in a row, but I had a really good friend in Princeton who died maybe 8 years ago, who was born in Pottstown in 1923. Her name was Sue Stember. Or she went by Zelda. She liked going by Zelda. And she told us a lot of stories about growing up in that part of the world, in that part of the country, and at that time. There were, her family were chicken farmers or something like that. But and one of the things that stood out from her stories that did definitely jive with this book was how, because the Jews were so insular, it wasn't them against the world, it was the German ones against the Lithuanians and the Romanians, like the infighting among where you came from in the old country, and how present that was in her daily life, being aware of where she was from. So just add to that historic fact. I thought when I started reading, I was like, oh my gosh, this is where Sue told me all of her stories. It's this town, it's this place where she actually grew up and was part of the Jewish community.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I don't know if you all got to read at the end. He dedicates the novel to his friend, to Cy Friend, who this man was the longtime director of the Variety Club Camp, which was a nonprofit camp for children with disabilities. And James McBride worked at this camp, which was in Pennsylvania, for 4 summers, over 40 years ago. And he was inspired about how Friend would interact with the campers and his spirit of Tikkun Olam. So McBride said that originally he was going to write a novel set in this camp, but he couldn't do it. It wasn't coming out well. So at the very end of this book that we just read, he put in this notion of having Moshe donate the land for a camp for disabled children. So in his acknowledgements, McBride made this comment, and he said that Cy's lessons of inclusivity, love, and acceptance, delivered not with condescending kindness, but with deeds, and showed the recipients the path to true equality, remain with me for the rest of my life. So I wanted to see your thoughts about whether or not you thought that this story and its characters embodied Cy's lessons, and how they did or didn't. Judy?
So my background is I'm an audiologist, and when I first came to New Jersey in 1974, deaf children were anywhere from completely isolated into two schools. I knew because we lived so close to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's system was similar. They were also put into psychiatric hospitals with diagnoses of paranoid. I came from New York, where deaf children were signing or total communication. They were learning how to speak. And I thought I was thrown back 50 years. It was, and I worked in Trenton in Mercer Medical Center. When Matt and I listened to McBride's interview, it was more of a talk at the Free Library in Philly, where he speaks about Cy Friend. And he speaks about, it seems to me he put together two books. He wanted to write about his grandmother and her life. And he wanted to write about the alienation of those who are disabled. And he's actually talking a great deal about physical disability. I would encompass all disability, but he's talking a lot about physical disability for that particular camp. And he seemed very much to want to draw this commonality of equality being the underlying theme of the book, that until we integrate differences among people into the concept of equality, whether it be religion, race, disability, or whatever, we can't function as humanity. And there was kind of a cry from him that the time is now to put apart all these differences because our world is in deep trouble. And that's why I found the book so amazing, that he tried to put in, and he did sneak in his political views there. I didn't mark the dog-ear the pages, where he does this whole summary of, why these injustices need to, and I think you'll remember where he says, foreshadowing the future where people will be on devices, they'll be doing nothing but disconnecting themselves from their community. We will have lost all hope of ever redeeming equality because we will be isolated. And on Zoom, it's kind of funny, we're together in the little boxes, but he kind of is giving us this warning call that if we don't wake up, so I almost think of him sounding the shofar. That's how I see that call to action and to inclusion, and those differences that you were speaking about among the Roman and the Romanian and the Polish and the German Jews. This has gone on forever. All of these infighting among these groups. My family came from Germany, and my grandmothers lived in a house where they had for all survivors, and they all sat on different benches. And they all didn't talk to each other necessarily unless there was an event that brought them together, because they knew their own society, their own ways, and they were different than maybe someone else. And they would cross those lines very carefully. And I think that's his call. We have to stop doing that, finding these differences. And I thought that he also mentioned that Pottstown, just for you, it was arbitrary. He was going to Pottsville because Pottsville had a greater Jewish population outside of Pittsburgh, but he was driving along on one of his interviews and he stopped in Pottstown and he thought this could be Mayberry. So he apologized to the audience. He said, if anyone's from Pottstown, it has nothing to do with your history, even though I studied it, because he used it as his takeoff for history, but not for specificity about the particular place. And our son went to Lawrenceville School, so we used to go to Pottstown all the time and see the Hill School and race against them. And the same type of chapel requirements were still required at Lawrenceville when our son went in the 90s. And the difference was that they finally had gotten a rabbi. And that was after they finally had enough students to say, we're still having chapel, but now there's a rabbi too.
Interesting. Any other thoughts? So I can't see everyone, so sometimes I see someone raising their hand, but I can't see you all, so just speak up if you want to say something. Okay, so we can move on. I wanted to add something that you said, Judy, about the divisions within the Jewish community. He showed it also within the Black community there. So there were the Blacks in Chicken Hill, right? And then there were the Logods, and those two didn't really mix until they had to come together, right? And I think in his book, all these different communities came together, like to save Dodo. But it wasn't just the Jewish divisions, it was the Black divisions as well. So moving on, the book explores the intersection of African American and Jewish cultures in Chicken Hill. So in what ways do you think that the narrative portrays the relationship between the Jews and the Blacks? And also, did it challenge any preconceived notions or stereotypes that you may have had?
Susan, it's Miriam.
Hi, Miriam.
I was really struck by how open Shona was. She was open to all people, and religion was open to her. She was able to read the Torah, which was forbidden to women in those times. And she was so accepting of everyone. And I think that set the tone for how the Jews and the Blacks got along. She was the bridge.
Yeah. Yeah, she was. Any other thoughts?
I mean, she was a bridge, but music is such a great bridge too. As somebody who loves all different sorts of music, I thought that was great. That the whole idea of the music hall starting out for financial reasons, but then I think he actually realized, wow, this is actually pretty great music. So the music also was a bridge throughout the book. I thought that brought the different communities together also.
And the
in
fact
addition
that
to
Moshe opened up his theater, his music hall to the Blacks.
and had both Jewish and Black shows going on there.
Yeah.
And even brought in the chick and some of the other sorts of we got the Latin music. We had it all going on under Moshe's in Moshe's establishment, which I thought.
And the Jews and the Blacks also had a common person that they hated in Doc, right? That they could join in that way, which is a human dynamic.
This is Matt. I think, just the title of the book brings together two elements, heaven and earth. And Shona is the heaven who is bringing to earth goodwill and good deeds, regardless of who is coming into the store. I think that's a kind of a primary concept in the book, that here is someone who is making the connection among people and treating people with a sense of equality throughout her life, regardless of circumstances, maybe with perhaps the exception of Bernice, her next door neighbor, who she tries to befriend after Bernice kind of shuns her when they were children. I think that's kind of the only example where Shona herself is not a central Tacona alum figure.
But Shona and Bernice were still brought together through Dodo. Bernice knew that Shona needed a place to hide Dodo, and her backyard and Bernice's backyard with all of her kids was the perfect place for Dodo to go and just blend in with the other kids. So in that way, Shona and Bernice still had a connection, even though it wasn't like when they were young.
Yeah. So in many ways, the feelings and the issues that the residents of Chicken Hill wrestled with in the 1930s haven't changed much. So in what ways do you think that issues of race, religion, and class have changed? And what remains the same? Any thoughts? So like in the past 100 years, how have we evolved or have we not evolved?
Well, if you're going to address the relationship between Jews and African Americans, of course, they're African American Jews too. So this is a whole, but I'm just in rough terms. I guess we have older people like my age, we lived through the late 60s and things like that. And it's like a long road of, it seems to me there's a real closeness that's innate. But then we've gone through periods of great friction, and we're going through one now in certain circles. And I can remember as a kid when Malcolm X was coming up, and the fear there was in the Jewish community in New York, at least, of people like Malcolm X. It was real, and there was a lot of tension there, and then not tension and things like that. So I like the idea of this book showing, especially in the socioeconomic side, these are people who don't have much money, and showing Jews without money. The whole picture of the friction often comes with the Jews are the people with the money, and African Americans, they don't have money, so they're kind of overlords over us. So this to show this connection between people without money, and it almost is one of my crazy issues now. We're going on an election and all that stuff. That one of the ways that people who want to divide us in this country often do is to pit people who don't have money against other groups who don't have money. White poor people against Black poor people, white, Jews, and this kind of a thing has almost been a successful, maneuver. And so I do think the side of this book, I wish there was a sort of character in here that was the poor white guy who was brought around or something, because I think that that's a friction which is often overlooked.
Good points. Anybody else?
It's such a huge question, I guess, but on a broad scale, I think that Shona, back to the heaven and earth comment that Matt made, she was so deeply religious, so deeply into reading scriptures and thinking about them all the time and bringing that forth into her daily life. And so it seems now, so that's a message. We have so many people who are so learned in different sorts of books, but not living that, not making, or it appears to not make much effort to connect that to their daily life. And then you've got pockets of people throughout the world, whether they're reading the Torah, the Quran, or whatever their holy book is, who are actually trying to unite with each other through embodying the words of their book in the world. So things are dark in that there's so much being done in the name of those books, but I do think there are pockets of communities where people trying to live in the true spirit of their books are trying to be a force for good. I guess I will say. And just moving here recently from West Philly, I was part of a congregation there called Tzedek that was very closely tied in with the Muslim community in West Philly. And that was a core theme. We had a lot going on, mutual work going on between the two groups for people who were, I think, reading their book and trying to bring it to earth in the way that Shona was.
Go ahead, Andre.
I just was asking just a personal thing. I lived in West Philadelphia for 25 years. So I was asking, where in West Philly? Where did you live?
42nd and Pine, but Cold Sedek is out of the Calvary Baptist Church on the corner
okay.
of Baltimore and 48th Street.
Oh, yeah, because I was on 42nd Street. But yeah, it's, I think.
Transgender rabbi that the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College has graduated is the rabbi there. Really great rabbi, Rabbi Lev Kornach.
Just a personal question.
So I think that you asked a huge question, and I think he's addressing, and actually I think Andre was onto part of what he's warning us about and directing us in his novel, in that money can really screw things up. And when they don't have money, their struggles are paralleling each other and they're coming together as a community. But when they buy into the American dream, be it the Jews or the Blacks or any group, then we start to be separated out into our groups. And the American dream of having maybe the divider, not the actual racism or differences in religion. And so he kind of calls to us to, in his interview at the library, the free library, to make use of those religious tenets, healing the world, tikkun olam, which occurs in all different religions in a different way, but not to use that religion to divide us further and fractionalize and criticize. And he says, I am a religious man, but I've had enough church doctrines. He doesn't want the doctrines. He wants what he has shown us, showing us. Reach into those books, take out of them the sense of your religion and use that in your humanity. So I think he's calling for us to do what you're saying, what is happening. And I think it's an ongoing dynamic. On Friday night, we were at BJ in New York. There were about 100 people, and there are Black Jews, as Andre said, in that community. But one of the ways in is the music. And I think he knew that one of the ways in to bringing people into communities is the music. And I think that was why that music was so important in there. And there has been a great history of Jews loving jazz. And jazz in New York brings, we just listened to Bella Fleck in New York, and you get a lot of mixed people in there of races. And there was a Latino harpist, electronic harpist. And so I think we need to keep finding those bridges, those commonalities, and avoiding the financial, who can pay the most gets it their way.
I just want to say quickly that I want to take over, but last Friday I was playing with my neighborhood. I play bass in a bluegrass and folk jam here, and we meet every month. And the majority of people that I play with, they're all fundamentalist Christians, very Republican. We get together, we play, we put that aside for a while. We got a little some tension sometimes, but we put that aside. And I have to say, those were the people who were more solicitous of my emotions after October 7th. And music is obviously a pathway. It's not perfect, but obviously, every band needs a bass player, they need you. It is good. All these things, these cultural things are really connections. And when people try to make them not dividers, and they do, there we're in trouble. That's when we're in trouble.
Interesting. So I'm going to pivot a little bit. So, Son of Man, he was the sadistic attendant on Ward C1 at Penhurst. He shares some similarities and differences with Doc Roberts, who was another villain in the book. So a few questions about the two of them. So first of all, how would you compare their forms of evil? Do you think they're both inherently malevolent in the same way? And also, why do you think the character was named Son of Man?
Actually, I don't know the answer to that question, but every time I read it, I thought about it. I thought that same question. Why did he name him that?
Yeah.
Well, I would contrast it to Jesus, Son of God, embodiment of good and a savior for the world, whereas Son of Man is a demon. He's a devil, in effect. And I think going from there, Son of Man without a God, man left to his own devices, can be good, very good, or very evil. And Son of Man was an embodiment of it. And I think, there's a contrast, cultural contrast, and ideological contrast between Doc and obviously Son of Man. Son of Man comes from the Low Country, like Nate, and the Low Gods have in them, as the book explains, there's a force that, if not restrained, can create significant destruction and harm. I think with Doc, it's really more the heritage of white supremacy and discrimination. Part of it's socioeconomic, some of it is racial, but they each have their paths toward kind of the same end, the destruction of the world rather than the preservation of the world and a building of the world.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that both of them worked in a medical setting. So, people are supposed to be healed in a medical setting, but Doc Roberts was a doctor and, was certainly evil in his own way. And also Son of Man was in this ward where the sickest of the patients were. And he preyed on these people who were incredibly vulnerable. So I'm guessing there was a reason that he set both of his villains, who were medical providers in one way or another. Oh, Judy, you're on mute.
Hi, so welcome everybody who I might not have met yet. I'm Rabbi Janine. Really glad to see you. I was thinking too, I don't know if the author, if James McBride had intended this, but for someone who spends a lot of time in Torah, the B'nai Elohim, the children of God, is this strange phrase that shows up in Genesis. It's in Genesis 6, where it's after creation, it's after all kinds of things are happening, that the world is kind of becoming this really toxic and evil place. And there's this very strange, very confusing text that talks about what is often translated as giants or the powerful beings having children with the daughters of the people on this earth. And that these giants, it's like a very strange, like if you've never read it before, you'd think it's from a different book altogether, right? And it probably was, but it's a really interesting, and there's this really, I was just looking it up now, that there's this interesting commentary about how it's connected to Cain, who is right, the first to really sin, I guess we would say, although Adam and Eve have their issues as well. But there's something going on there for Torah and for the rabbis and rabbinic commentary that has something to do with like our baser instincts and where they come from, and are they supernatural, are they mythical, and so there might be a connection there, but there definitely is one in our own in our text heritage itself.
Interesting, thank you. Any other thoughts about these two characters?
I guess Son of Man was like crazy psycho killer crazy, right? And Doc, we had some empathy for him. Like he's the one where you see his path, you see how he turned into this white supremacist. He almost stumbled into it just looking for love and acceptance. Not to excuse some of the crappy things that he did, but I think we're seeing perhaps some notion that there are people who are close to the edge, but perhaps with the right sort of outreach could get pulled back across. Doc was more in that camp to me, even though over time he veered more into the evil camp. I think there were at times when, by the luck of the draw, some other intervention might have had his path going a completely different direction. Whereas the other guy, he was just like, again, like there was nothing. We saw absolutely nothing. Of course, we don't know his story getting up to where he was. But to me, they were so different that way.
Can I comment on that? I wonder if that wasn't intentional, that, we're almost giving Doc Roberts white privilege. We're acknowledging what he's done is bad and not, but we're given a backstory. We're like, we can. Whereas Son of Man, we're presented with the low gods have a thing in them that's bad.
There's one line that I guess maybe you can help with. I don't know how you all interpreted it, but when Nate delivers his final blow to Son of Man, he somewhere says, I am sorry, I see something happen to you, just like something happened to him. And to me, he somewhere thinks that we are all human. There is that sense of God within everyone. And when they turn into these monsters, be it Doc or Nate, there is a reason for it. And to me, that is contrasted by Monkey Pants, who has all these incredible challenges and yet reaches out for humanity to sustain him. Whereas these two characters, and I would say that Doc's disability also set him up for the openness of the white privilege. So I think that's why McBride gave him a little bit of a disability, to think that that's your reason for going that path that was so easily open. That white supremacist path was really open to him. But why did he choose it? Well, he really loved Hona. Had he gotten Hona, maybe he would have been more like Moshe, but he didn't get Hona. So he went that other path. But he did have the capacity in the beginning to have this passion for her. And we don't know, Nate, what the horrible thing that happened to him was. At least I don't recall, but there's something that he believes
Nate knows because it happened to him.
I
So,
think the problem with Doc was that he never forgave Chona. That was, that was a childish thing. It was, they were teenagers and he felt that she didn't want him. She just said no, but he never forgave that, and he kept building and building hatred. And I think that was the lesson we learned from him, that we have to forgive, or else we could end up very poorly.
So my wife Sharon just raised an issue which perhaps is a subliminal message with this Son of Man. If you recall, there was this son of Sam who was a killer who took a long time to find this elusive murderer. We might still be remembering that, and that's a kind of subliminal message.
I was also going to add too that one of the problems, not with what the author wrote, but just my problem with the character of Doc, and is I think he's intentionally doing this because I think that he's an incredible author, and I want to give him the the kavod, the honor of saying that he did this on purpose, but that so many men and boys are raised in this world, in our society, to think that women owe them something. And so that Hannah, or she doesn't respond to his affection or interest, and he creates this entire thing around her that she spurned him and it's her fault, and he's just going to be a bad person because he didn't get what he wanted, right? But like we know as adults who live in a mature society, that's not how real life works, right? That like people are allowed to say no to you, they're allowed to not be interested. And it's a little scary to think that how many times a woman is blamed for a man's violence when what she did was just to say no. And I think he did that on purpose, because he's a bad person, right? But I wouldn't ever excuse what he's done to say like that's an okay or something that we should continue to normalize, right? It's the same thing as when you get hit on the playground and maybe your mother or somebody might have said, your teacher might have said to you, oh, he just likes you, right? He's picking on you because he likes you. He pulls down your dress because he likes you, or whatever. I think a lot of girls learn from a very early age that any kind of attention is a good thing, right? And so we should celebrate it instead of saying like no. So I just wanted to just interject there for that part.
Yeah, that's a great point. I fully agree with you. I didn't think about that, but you're absolutely right.
That was the part that really bothered me also, that because Chona was like the main character, I felt like for me the theme was about when giving people permission to say no and giving permission to people to say yes, because there were lots of yeses also. And I just felt like that was a symbolic way for James McBride to show privilege. And the other part that I felt that woven in was the topography, that was how he illustrated like the geography and the topography, like the different levels where people lived, going up the hill, Chicken Hill. And Andre, you would know better than I around that. But I found that level of metaphor. That's what I really paid attention to in the story, of how how people traveled through the land and the geography and the different levels of relationship. The farm, the evil farmer who, it just like all of that was just so fascinating to me. So anyway, but for me, it was really about being able to say no. So anyway.
And I have stayed quiet, as you may or may not have noticed, because I read the book several months ago. And I said, well, what's all the hoopla about? So apparently this book did not connect with me. And now that I've heard all of your deep comments, guess what's going to be on my #1 list? So thank you for that gift of reassuring me that there is value in the notoriety that this book got, you know, that it wasn't just senseless. It makes sense. So thank you for that.
Susan, you weren't on yet when I announced that I had just read it for the second time. And I loved it much more the second time. And then I reread the first chapter a third time because that's so key to the ending of the book.
Yeah.
I love McBride and I've read all of his books. My favorite was Deacon King Kong. But I have to say, this is close to the bottom of my list for a McBride book. I enjoyed it, and I'll read every book he writes. But I some of those other books are right up there in like the best books I've read in my life that I just keep thinking about. And this, I don't know, this one will fall into that category.
For me, the book is also intergenerational. So my 37-year-old daughter and our 38-year-old rabbi love the book. And then also my 99-year-old mother-in-law. I've been trying to get her to read a book for a year now. And she's like, oh, I can't read. I can't find anything. So I bought it in large print and I read it in large print. And I gave it to her and she is loving it. And it's bringing her back to a place that I didn't know about her. Like and so that it's a beautiful multi-generational book as well.
I missed the beginning. Did we talk about, I didn't know that he lived in Lambertville.
Yeah, we did talk about that. Yeah.
I'm sorry I missed that. Does anybody ever see him?
So I saw him. This is actually funny. I was in McCaffrey's buying bananas a couple of months ago.
In New Hope?
In New Hope. And so was he. And he walked, and as he was moving away, he bumped into me so I said to him, I asked him if he was James McBride. And he didn't like that I recognized him. And he said yes. And then he put his head down and started walking away. So clearly, he didn't like that I called out that I recognized him. But I did call after him and I just said that I've read all his books and I'm a great fan because I did want him to know that. And then a friend of mine works out at a gym in New Hope at Cornerstone. And she said that he's frequently there when she's there, but that he stays to himself and people don't approach him. Did anyone else ever run into him or meet him?
Yes. My wife has spoken to people at the Lambertville Library, and they report that he's very private and shy and really doesn't want to be recognized.
I have to say, because I also saw the film that Matt and Judy saw, and then the one we saw today, his personality was totally different. I was shocked when I saw the other one because he's such a great writer, but he was so shy. He did not have a lot. His language was quite different, I thought, from the way he writes. But now that you say that, I'm sure it's because he is very, very shy.
Yeah, and Rabbi, we started off with a clip. I don't know if you saw it, that I had found. It was just a short clip. I found a lot of really long ones, but I thought this one was good. So yeah, if you want, we can maybe.
I think that's how I found. that's how I figured out he was in Lambertville because of your clip. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I do know that September 24th is a book thing in New York, and he is speaking. A book show, I guess you call it.
He's also an incredible jazz musician.
Yes.
And he
Years
calls
ago-
himself a failed jazz musician, which is hilarious. He says, you know, I keep failing at it, but I'm going to keep playing.
Yeah.
And
Years ago, Mark and I went down to the jazz club in Philly, and he was playing with his kid, with his son, and it was pretty incredible.
So I did meet him when Color Purple was, The Color of Water was out. And he, at that time, his mother was living in Ewing. I live in Lawrence, it's the neighboring town. And he came to Barnes and Noble on Route 1 at the market fair. My friend Shoshana and I went because we had read the book, and his mother was with him. And he had done a reading. While he was quite shy, his mother wasn't. And she welcomed people for coming and hearing her son read. And so this is a long time ago when that book first came out, but he read, and this was a very small group, and he was still quite comfortable, quite uncomfortable just reading, but he was proud. He said, "This is my mother." I have a question. We left out one character that really I just love so many parts of the book. I just felt like it was many books put together, and he just kind of put them. But Malachi, I also recently just looked at an interview done by Isaacson, and he pronounces his name Malachi or something, and then
I saw that too. Yeah.
Right. And McBride says, "No, I kind of call him Malachi." So he's kind of shy with everyone because Isaacson is a world-renowned biographer, and interviewing him, and he looked like he was holding on during that interview. But how did you all feel about Malachi? Because I think his insertion into this in book is brings a different kind of sense where we're missing joy. And Malachi represents some of the joy of Judaism, some of the loss. What do we bring with us in our religion, from our old ways? What do we embody of our new ways? But isn't he the beginning and the end? Meaning that's who they encounter is Malachi. So I'd like to hear what you guys thought about him.
I thought he was magical and Malach, right? Malach means angel. And I felt like he was sort of like sort of a symbol, like I kind of see him as sort of like a Chagall painting, like hovering over. Maybe he was real, maybe he wasn't. But he was there to teach a lesson about grit and about reinventing yourself and being weird, which is cool. So that's where I went with Malachi.
So he had an interesting quote in the
Well,
book. So
I know,
Malachi, he said at one point about he said that the African Americans, or the Blacks at that time, they knew who they were, but he felt that the Jews didn't really know who they were. Did any of you remember like seeing that in the book? And I thought that was very, very interesting. And I think he was probably talking about assimilation. I'm not really sure. But remember how, like, once the Jews made money, they wanted to leave Chicken Hill. They wanted to be with the wealthy whites. And only Moshe and Shona stayed up there. And I wondered if he felt that the Jews in America were assimilating too much and losing themselves.
Your voice went out.
Well, because I just reread the book, Malachi was the last Jew on Chicken Hill, and he was living in what had been the synagogue.
Yeah.
Other than that, I really didn't quite understand what his role was other than to bring joy. And apparently he was an incredible dancer.
And a terrible baker.
Yes, that's right. I forgot about that part.
He's
The whole
incredibly.
time until the very end, we think Moshe killed him and he's the one down there, right? Was I
No,
the only one who thought?
He's not
no,
lying.
no.
Okay, I mean, yeah, of course we learn otherwise at the end, but
Yeah.
for the whole book, because of the red coat and the mezuzah
Oh.
being down there, I kept thinking, okay, how's Moshe going to kill him? Like, when's that? That's weird. Like, I kept waiting. I thought that was the foreshadowing for the beginning, and to me, it was like a twist at the end. Like, oh, it wasn't him down there. I mean, of course, it wasn't him because he was at the beginning. I thought they were going to do some weird thing about that, and that there was going to have been some fight between Moshe and him at some point. I kept waiting for that to happen, but it didn't. But I saw him as just a reminder that we're talking about this very sedentary community, but there's a whole swath of of people who are also always on the move, the itinerant person who comes in and out of your community and brings value, even though they're not there all the time, always amongst you. That to me, that was his value, or what he brought to the story.
I thought he was he's the impractical guy, whereas the uncle, is it the uncle who's the gangster? Who's the guy? The uncle is the gangster. He's the practical guy. You know, he's so he's an interest. I think the whole gangster angle, Jewish gangster angle, was wonderful because I think that we have a tendency to forget about that as Jews, and they're very colorful characters. You know?
That's true. Well, I'm looking at the time. I know we're very far over, so I'm guessing, Jerry, we should probably close this, but I wanted to thank all of you for coming and for discussing the book today. I think this was really interesting. I learned a lot from all of you. I think we all probably learned from each other, and it was very cool.
Thank you for hosting, Susan.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much, Susan. Really great book. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.